Hello, good people, and welcome to Finance Skills Hub. Here we learn, we connect, and we grow. Power Query is a powerful tool in Microsoft Excel and Power BI. We basically use it to extract data from many sources. It can be used to transform, shape data, to optimize it for our data analysis. If you're a new user or you're already using Power Query, what we have done is we've put together this case study to help you learn more practical ways you can use Power Query. So you learn how to get data from many sources, including a folder, CSV file, an Excel workbook. Then we'll go through at least 12 transformational steps to help you get a sense of the different ways you can use Power Query in the office or at your work. Then we'll learn how to put it all together to answer a case study that I'm sure you can relate to. We've shared the files with you so you can come along step by step. So if you're game, join me in Excel and let's get started. Okay, so before we begin, let's go through the case study. This is a case study on automating HR fund transfers for an audit preparation. So look at it this way. You are a data analyst in a firm. Your HR has approached you to help them prepare for an audit. They need a clear summary of funds transferred to different banks for the first 7 months in the year. Now, to make this process easier and faster, you will need to create an automated system that will be able to extract and summarize data from 3 main sources. So HR keep their data in 3 sources. So there's the basic salaries file, which is stored in an Excel workbook, right? Then apart from that, they spool staff details from the organization's software. So this is stored in a CSV file. You have to use that because it is that file that contains the bank details for each staff. Then aside that, they also have a folder that contains bonus payments for each month, right? So to put things in context, we've put the files in a folder for you, shared in the video description, in the link on the screen as well. So the first file is the data stats. This is the file that contains the aggregated salary figures for each staff for the months. So the months are spread here, and then the employee IDs are here. You understand that this data is not in a good shape. So in terms of structure, we'll have to go through Unpivoting and those things to let the structure be right. When we are done, we'll learn how Power Query automates all our transformations by just adding this extra data. So we are going to consolidate the 2, right? So that is your first data source. The second data source is the one that they spool from the organization's software. Normally, when you export data to CSV or Excel, normally not in a good shape. So you have to use Power Query to optimize this for your analysis. We'll learn how to properly structure this. Okay, go through some steps to make sure that we can easily get the key indicators that we are interested in. That is your second file. Then your third file will be the bonus file. So in the bonus file, you have these 7 files for each month of the year. They have the same shape and form. So you have your payday, and then the employee ID, and then bonus. All this is supposed to be transformed so that it's in sync with your analysis. In the end, what you hope to give HR is a very simple summary report that shows for each month from January to July how much they paid in total for all the banks spread here in columns, as well as the grand total. So typical HR data, if there are no movements, no recruits, and no resignations, you should normally have consistent numbers across or with very little variance. You can be able to slice this by basic and bonus using this slicer that you have here, right? So that is what you want to give HR. But to be able to do that, Power Query is an ETL tool. So you are going to learn how to get data from a table, from a CSV, from a folder. Then you go through these transformation steps, 14 of them, right from naming a query, unpivoting, appending, merging, even grouping, right? So you learn how to do all these steps. Then you appreciate the difference between loading your query as a table, loading as a connection, and then refreshing queries. Okay. So all these is to give you a sense of how Power Query can make your life easy if you are into transforming and shaping data for your work. If you are new or you're already using Power Query, I believe this case study will give you a lot of tips that can help you improve your work in Power Query. So to make it easier, we're also going to use this text file, which has been shared in the folder. So every step we are going to go through is going to be recorded. So I'll read it and then I'll execute so that you can follow step by step, right? So if you're game, let's get started. Okay, so let's go through 3 golden rules that you should have at the back of your mind when you are working with data. To make it easier for you to analyze data, especially tabular presentations, it is important that the first rule, let every column or field in your data set represent a category or value column. So example, value columns contain numbers that we can aggregate, right? Example, salary, age, and all those ones. They should be set out in a distinct column or field. Then the other columns that you are going to use to break down your analysis, i.e. department, gender, and those ones, which in some cases we call attributes, right? Or categorical columns, are also set out in distinct columns, right? If your data is like that, it makes things easier. If that is met, you should then have only one data type. So if age are numbers, we should have numbers throughout. If name, text, we have text throughout, and so on, right? This is what we aim to get when we are working on transforming data in Power Query. If you have done the first rule right, the second rule should come along, where each row in your data set should have a single record observation. So in this case study, we expect that the row that we select on each staff should be information on that staff, that is his or her details or how much the person was paid, right? So we should have the row speaking to that. Then the third rule is that each cell should have a single value. We shouldn't be putting 2 values in a cell, okay? So each cell should have a dedicated 1 value, 1 cell to make things easier for us. So these rules are going to guide us as we start our transformation. Okay, so we are going to begin with the very first instruction. We are supposed to use the first file, data start. We are supposed to create a table named basic, and then we'll add the table to Power Query and name the query basic transaction, right? So let's get this done. So you come to the folder. This is the data stats. I'm going to double click on this to open it up. So this is our data. We have main data and extra data, right? The first requirement is that we should create a table called basic, and then we add it to Power Query, right? So tables are very important. It helps us structure the data. So I'm going to stand in any single cell, go to insert, and then insert a table on this range. The shortcut is also Control T. So you can do a Control T to do this. Okay, now we are supposed to name this table basic. So under the table name, you know it's a table when table design pops up here. So on the table name, I'm going to call this basic. Okay. Now, if you're new to Power Query sits under the data tab in most versions. So if you click on the data tab in the far left, you are going to see get data. So get data is a key icon for Power Query because it can get data from many sources, right? CSV files, PDF, and so on. So locate the get data and transform group. In there, you see a table icon. So there are smaller icons showing you the popular data sources that Power Query can lift data from. One of it is the table range. So because we have a table, we are going to load from this table, but make sure you are standing in the table. So please locate this table/range icon and then click. So this is going to open up Power Query. So we lifted our data into Power Query. This is the Power Query editor. Every data comes in here as a query. The second instruction was to name this as basic transactions, right? So we've named our query, which is going to show up here as well. Now, this is the data you just lifted. We need to transform and shape it properly using the golden rules that I showed you earlier. The rule says that if I have values and attributes I'm working with, these values or attributes should be set out in distinct columns. Okay, so we should have employee ID as we have it in a column on its own, but we have dates spread across 7 columns, which is not the best. Okay, if date is something we are going to use to break down our analysis, then we should have dates set out in a column on its own, right? So this layout is not going to be useful. If we are able to fix the problem, then we should now have our values, which in this case our basic payments, also set out in a column on its own. So let's see what the instruction is from this point. The third instruction says we should unpivot the date columns. So that is what I just explained to you, that because the date columns are sitting spread in 7 columns, it will not be very good for us in terms of our analysis. So these 7 columns are now going to be converted, if you like, into rows. That process is what we call unpivoting. So we are collapsing these columns into rows. There are 2 ways to do that. We can highlight the 7 columns. So you select the first one, hold the shift key, right arrow to select the 7 columns, or you could select the first one, hold the shift key, and then come and select the last one. So all these 7 columns are selected. We want to unpivot, right? So unpivot basically means we are converting these columns into rows stacked under each other. When it does that, it's going to actually align the numbers appropriately along the respective dates and the employee ID. So if these 7 columns are highlighted, gently right click on top of one of them, make sure the 7 are still intact, and then you choose Unpivot Columns. It's a right click menu item, so we choose this. Okay, so that is the process of unpivoting. You notice that it's giving us an attribute out of this process and then the value. So this is where the golden rule is met. We have our values here and then our attributes, and then we have our employee IDs, resulting in a longer table, which is preferred. So that is step number 3. Now let's go to step number 4. We are supposed to rename the columns attribute to date and value to amount, right? So this is renaming. So here I'm going to rename this date. You double click and then you name this date. You double click this one as well and then you name it amount. Right. Now notice that everything we are doing in Power Query is being recorded in the applied steps section, right from where we source the data from, right? The automatic process of changing the data type. I'll explain that later. The unpivoting that we did, and then currently the rename columns. So these steps are recorded so that if there are any changes at the original data source, you don't have to go through them again. Power Query would automatically execute these steps for you on refresh. Think of it like how macros work to automate your steps if you click on something to trigger them, right? So these are the apply steps. It's going to record every new step in the transformation process. Okay. The 5th step is that we are supposed to add a column and name it type and fill that column with the word basic. Okay. So here's the thing. We already have employee ID, date column, and amount. The requirement is we need to add a new column, name it type, and then fill all those cells in the column with the word basic, because in the end you are comparing basic and bonus. So you need that column to identify what kind of data you have in here. In Power Query, we can add a column in the Add Column tab. Okay, so in this case, we are going to use a very simple formula to generate this custom column. So this is the custom column. So you initiate it by clicking on custom column. Okay, this dialog box will pop up. So the name of the column is type. Okay, and the type is going to contain, so in this formula area, there's an equal to there, the word basic. So I'm going to type basic. So this is basic. Everything is fine here. So if I click OK, the expectation is that a new column is going to be added, and this is going to be called type. Okay, so this is how you add a new column in Power Query. Okay, so that step is done. Change the data type for the columns type and date. So let's discuss data type. In each column in Power Query, you are supposed to assign what kind of data you have in there. If you click on the top left section, there's an icon there. It lists all the available data types, decimal, currency, whole number, and so on. Right. So in this case, employee ID, even though it looks like numbers, the role it's going to perform is to help us identify our employees. So we can override this initial change type step and then assign a text data type to this. Right. Normally text data type will be sitting aligned to the left. Let's come to date. So for date, if you click here, it's currently reading text. Right. So we need to convert this into a proper date. So this is going to give us a proper date format. That's what you should do, so that in the end, your final calculations in DAX or any pivot table analysis you are going to do will respond accordingly. Right. Amount is 1.2, which means decimal number. That is fine. We'll maintain it. We'll maintain it as it is. And then our type is going to now go from the unassigned ABC123 to text. Okay. So this is what it means to assign the right data type. It's a very important step. Okay, so that has been done. Now, the next step is that we should exit Power Query and then load this transformation, load this query as a table. It requires us to keep an eye on the query pane that will pop up after. We are supposed to get 63 rows. Okay, so let's do this quickly. Now, when you are done with your transformation, you can temporarily load your work as a table, and other options are also available. So to do that, we'll come to Home. Okay, you see the Close and Load button. Under it, you see a drop down, Close and Load To. Okay, so this allows you to choose options apart from loading it directly as a table. So the instruction says we should load it as a table. So we will maintain the default selection, which is a table, and then we are going to dump it into a new worksheet. Now, while we are here, you can download this as a pivot table report, as a pivot chart, or hold it as a connection. So if you hold it as a connection, it basically means you are work in progress. You want it to hold what has been transformed so far in memory. You are likely to add more queries to it or connect to the data model and so on. In that case, it doesn't physically load either as a table or pivot table. Right, so maintain the default selections here and go ahead and click OK. So this is going to dump our transformed data as a table. So as expected, we have 63 rows in the queries pane. Okay, now let's see what we have here. In step 8, we are supposed to go to the extra data and cut and paste the data below the table basic. Now, let me explain what is happening here. You already have this original blue table. That is where you started from. You have transformed this to get this green version, the structured version that has employee ID, date, amount, and type. Now, the way Power Query works, if there are any changes in the original data, which is the blue table we started from, on refresh, this green output, okay, is supposed to update as well, running all the steps that we did in the transformation. So to help you appreciate what is going on, we are going to come to this extra data, which currently has the same shape as the starting data. So we are going to copy this. So I'm going to select the whole of this, Control A, Control C to copy. Then I'll come to the main data. Standing in row 11, I'm going to paste this. Now, because this is a table, the moment I paste, this is going to expand automatically to include the data in the table. So our original data where we started from has now changed. If I come to data and I refresh all, okay, I expect Power Query to go through the process and now update to give me 140 rows in the green table. So if I come here, you'll notice that we've now had the extra data come in, unpivoted, transformed, and gone through all the steps that we did. So that's how Power Query works. Okay, so we can keep this original data as long as the original shape is maintained. Any changes to this data on refresh would update that output you got from Power Query. We've finished the first section with our 140 rows using the start data. Next up, we are going to work on the data in the CSV and then go through the steps as well. Okay, so let's move on to section 2, where we bring in the data from the CSV file. So we are supposed to bring in the data, name it register, and then we move on. Right. So this is where we ended at the last step. Now there are two ways to bring in a new query. So if you're already in the original grid view where you saw the transform data, we can initiate another process to get this text CSV file. Okay, so you click and then you point it to where the CSV is. The alternative is you can go back to Power Query. So assuming you're already working in Power Query and you want to get new data from there, how do you go about it? This will help us learn how to navigate back to Power Query if you're in the original grid of Excel. So if I'm in data, I can show queries. So under data, you can click on show queries and connections. Okay. Then the queries will be listed to your right. You can double click and this takes you back to Power Query. Right. So if you're in Power Query, to bring in new data under home, you can go to the far right and you see new source. So here, just as we saw earlier, I have the option to bring in new files to my existing queries. So I'm going to direct this to text CSV and I'll come in here and pick the CSV file called other data. And I'll go ahead and then click import. Okay, so while we are here, you see a preview of the CSV data. We are not going to do much here. This is just a preview. So we'll go ahead and then click OK. Now this comes in as our second query. So we use the default name other data, but the step required us to name this register. So let's go ahead and name this register. We press enter and that is the transformation for that step. So we are required to remove the top 3 rows and also promote headers. Let's see what this means. So we are currently seeing the data presented with this caption other data. You see the 2 blank rows here. All the rows on top of employee ID are currently not relevant to our data structure. So we have to delete them. In Power Query, you cannot just right click and delete like you do in a regular Excel grid. So what we need to do is instruct that the top 3 rows be removed. So to do that, we'll come to home, remove rows, right? And then we'll choose remove top rows. So we'll click on this and we'll put in the number of rows that we want to remove, which is 3. So I'll click OK and it knocks off the first 3 rows. The step has also been recorded in our applied steps. Now after doing this, we are supposed to promote headers. So if you look at this carefully, our headers, employee ID, name, telephone, gender, and so on, is currently stuck as a first record. Okay, so we need to push this up. Okay, so to do that, while under home, somewhere in the middle, there's a group for transform. You see the option to use first row as headers. Okay, so let's click on this. So once we do that, it pushes up that row into a header, and the step has also been recorded. So that completes that step. We are supposed to split name and telephone number into different columns. Okay, so let's see how we go about this. This is the column that is currently combined, named and telephone number. Okay, so we are going to split this to separate the names from the telephone numbers. Now, there are several ways to do this. Depends on the version of Excel you have. You may have some of the features or not. So I'll try and do the two approaches. Now, if you are using a recent version of Excel, this can easily be done when we go to split column under the home. Okay, there's an option here to split from non-digit to digit. Okay, so in this case, our non-digit portion is the name, and then the digit portion will be the numbers. Right, so if I give this instruction right now, while the column is selected, you notice that it actually splits this name and the telephone number in the next column. Right. It can happen that you may not have the option to split non-digit to digit, depending on your Excel version. So I'm going to reverse this step and then see the alternative. So the last step that was added here was split column. I'm going to delete this step by just clicking on the X. Now, if you don't have the option to split digit, non-digit, you can select this. Now, in this case, we are going to use a delimiter. So that's a consistent character that we can use to separate. If you look through, you realize that 0 is consistent. That's the first 0 of the telephone number. Right. So you can select this one. Then we'll choose split by delimiter, which is the first option. So I'll click on this. So once I click on it, I'm required to choose the delimiter. There are options here, but I'm going to choose custom. Okay. Then in the custom, I'm going to put in 0. So 0 to represent the first 0 of the numbers. Now, in some cases, you need to be clear on where it should split at. In this case, there are other zeros in here. So if you keep it as it is, it's going to split it at each occurrence of the delimiter. So the best option here is to choose the leftmost delimiter so that it only splits at just the first instance. Okay, so let's see what we get from this. If I click OK, now you notice that it detaches the telephone numbers from the number. But we have another problem that comes out of this. We've lost our leading 0. Okay, again, we can fix this. So all we need to do is just add a prefix, which is just the leading 0, to bring back our zeros for the telephone numbers. So we can do this by going to transform. Okay, you see this option for format. So while the column is selected, you come in here and then we add a prefix. So we'll add this prefix 0, and now I'm going to click OK. Okay. So once I have this, you will notice that this is now aligned. My telephone numbers are here. So for those who will not have that option, this is the step you go through to achieve this step. Okay, so after doing this, the next step is to rename the columns we split, name and telephone, ensuring that the data type of the telephone column is a text, right? So let's get this done. Now, this is the name column. So I'm going to double click and we call this name. Data type is text, confirmed. And then this is the telephone number. So I'm going to call this telephone. Okay. So we should ensure that this is text because we don't expect to aggregate, right? So we just covered that step. Now, Let's go to the next one. We should split account number and bank name and rename. So it's similar to what we did earlier. If you go a bit to the right, you notice that account number and bank name are put together. Okay, so going by the same approach where we use the delimiter, we first need to identify the kind of delimiter, consistent character, that can be used to split this. And if you look closely, it is a dash. But if you use a dash directly, we will end up with leading and trailing spaces. So we might as well just modify the dash with a leading and trailing space so we don't have to trim afterwards. So let's select this. We can split column under transform. Okay. And we choose delimiter here. So choosing the delimiter, we'll go to custom and then we'll enter our custom delimiter, which in this case is space dash space. Okay, so it's going to cut through and then split this into 2 columns. So I'll click OK. So as expected, we have our account number and our bank names split. Right. Now let's look at the next instruction. So after splitting the account number and bank name, we are supposed to rename, right, with the respective accounts, with the respective headers. Right, so let's do that quickly. So I'll double click this and then maybe back off the whole of this up to account number and then come to the bank name and just write bank name here. Okay, so we have something like this. Now again, account numbers are not going to be aggregated. So while we are here, let's convert this to text. Okay, so that's it comes in here as an attribute. So that is to complete that step. Now we are supposed to create a department column using conditional column, right? So let's go through what this means. If you look closely, the dump we got had each department in total rows. Okay, so example, for those in admin, they are in the first 3 rows, those in finance, next 3 rows, and so on. Again, this is not going to help us. Since department is an attribute or something we use in analysis, it will be best to have the column set out as a distinct column labeled department. So how do we proceed from this point? We need to be a bit creative here. So if it is established that every total row contains the department, as you can see here, then we can use the total as basis to do that conditional column. So to create a conditional column, we can come to add column, right? And then you see the option to add a conditional column. Now the basis for that conditional column is that if the employee ID, okay, contains any word that has total in it, then we expect that column to contain or through that text, which is the total, administration, and so on, right? Otherwise, it should return a null, right? So if you run that condition, the first 3 rows is going to return, the first 3 rows will return nulls, while the total admin will be the only entry in that column at that point. Let's see how this works. So I'm under add column. I'll come to conditional column. Okay, we can name it here automatically. So let's call this department. Okay, so in the conditional column, it's like an if statement, but you are using columns to write your if statement. So the first condition is that if column name, in this case, employee ID, okay, there are some operators here, equals and so on. We are going to choose if it contains, okay, the word total. So that is what we've established. Then we want a column, the content of a column. So we'll select a column, and that column is going to be employee ID. So we want it to return that content as a new column. Otherwise, it's going to return now, right? So if employee ID contains the word total, then throw the content in a new column. Otherwise, return now for the lines that do not contain total. So I'm going to click OK. So this is what we have. You realize that there's a new column called department, and all the lines that have the total in them are now in here for our new column. Okay, now we are supposed to fill up the department column. Okay, so let me explain what this means. If you look closely, before every total in this new column are empty cells filled with nulls. So if the first 3 cells here are all administration, I'm going to take this and then fill upwards, right? So fill up means we are going up to fill this with administration, administration, administration. Next, finance, 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 all the way up, right? So fill up is a step that we can add. It's available under transform, okay? You see fill here, so you can choose fill up, or you can also right click, and then you see fill here, and then you can choose fill up. So we are going to fill up, and then we get something like this. So all this is part of the process of creating a new department column. So we now have all the departments locked in, but it is now fixed between total and the number of people in that department. Let's read the next step. The next step says that we should extract the department using the extract between delimiters option, right? So if you look closely, you notice that each department consistently is locked in between total space and then the column that introduces the number. So if I'm able to put in a beginning and end delimiter, it means I should be able to grab all the departments, right? So to do this, let's go to extract. So extract is here under transform. I'm going to use text between delimiters, right? So I'll choose text between delimiters. I just need to determine my starting delimiter and my end delimiter. So my starting delimiter is going to be the first space. I don't need to use the whole total. Okay, so I'll put in a space here, and then my ending delimiter will be the column. So I'll put in a column for the end delimiter, and I'm going to click OK. Right, so this is going to now give me my department. Okay, now let's read the next step. So we're supposed to replace blank value with now in the branch column. Let's see what this is. So if you come to the branch column, you notice that there are some branches here. The way it's set up, all those in HQ will come from this row 1, all the way to row 13. Then those in the other branches follow, and so on, right? So what it means is that if we fill down, we should be able to get the branches for each stuff. Now, if it's blank, we can't fill down. It's normally when the cells are now that we can. So we're going to replace these blank cells with now. So we select the column, right click, replace values, right? A lot of the popular actions are in the right click menu. So replace values. What are we replacing? Replace with blank. So we are typing nothing here, and we are replacing this with now, NULL, right? So please, it's case sensitive, ensure that you type it correctly, and then we click OK. So if this is in place, then it means we can fill down these starting points. Okay, so in the subsequent step, it is asking us to fill down the branch column, which we can do now. So once this is selected, I'll right click, and then you see fill here. I'm going to choose fill down. Okay, so just like that, we now have the branches for each stuff nicely filled in. Okay, So those are the steps you use, especially when you spool data in a CSV format and you have to fill up or fill down. So that is the lesson in this section. Now, let's see if at this point we can answer some questions while in Power Query. Okay, how many employees are in the various departments? Let's see how we can answer this. In Power Query, we can do grouping. Grouping is like a summary. Okay, so we want to create a summary on departments. So we want to group. Okay, but if you look at this, I think we may have missed a step. Okay, so before we do the grouping, looking back, I think we may have missed a step. And that step was that we should filter to keep rows that do not contain total, right? We should have done that before replacing the blanks with now, right? We can still do that. So if you notice, after we did the fill up, now these total admin, total research rows are redundant, right? So every row here that doesn't contain total, we are filtering to keep, right? So let's do that. I'll click on this filter icon, right? Then I'll come to text filters. Okay. We are keeping every row that does not contain. Okay. So we filter to keep that does not contain the word total. Okay. So that is what we put in here, and then we'll click OK. So once we do that, it knocks off all the redundant total rows. So if you look at it, we currently have a full transformed register of our employees, their names, telephone numbers, and so on. So at this point, we can proceed and then answer our question. The question was, how many employees are in each department? We have our department column here. So this is going to be the basis for our grouping. We can do the grouping under transform, group by, okay? So that is an option, or we can right click and then we see the group by option here. So let's initiate this. Now, the basis for the grouping is on the department column. It's going to give birth to another column when we group, right? That column can be named. So the name of that column is count of staff, right? So just to give it a name that reflects what we are coming to do there. In that column, we want to count the rows in the department column. Okay, so this is the basic setup. If I go ahead, okay, so now we need to take note that this is a summary that has been derived from our earlier data. In Power Query, you could always step back, okay, to see how the data was before the step came in. So this is where we were, and this is the grouped version. Right, we really don't expect to continue in this grouped form, but maybe on the side, you want to just do a quick calculation, you can bring this in. Or in some cases, you can even take it out as a new query and then group it aside. Okay, so for this purpose, it was just to show you how to group. So we can now take this step out, and then we are back to where we started. Now let's see the last. So the second question says, how many male or female employees are at HQ and the branch? Right. This is similar to what we did earlier. The grouping now is going to be done instead of department on the branch. Okay. But here we are supposed to break down by gender and then count how many male females are in each branch. Right. So let's see this in action. So I'm going to select the base field, which is going to be the branch. So we have it here. I'll right click and then we proceed with the grouping option. So I'll choose group by, right? Now, if I go on like this in the basic setting, we just have only one column, but I want to see by gender as well. So I'll choose advanced and then add another field to this. So I want to see this summary by gender, right? So here, I'm still going to name the new column count of staff, which is the aggregation. The operation is going to be count rows, okay? And this is what is going to give us the analysis by gender and branch. So I'll click OK. So this is what we have. So for headquarters, 5 females, 5 males. For the branches, we have 6 males and then 4 females, right? So we can start off with the base field, add an extra field for the attributes, and then proceed with our aggregating column. So that's the second example of grouping. Again, I'm going to take back the step so that we are back where we started. So this will now complete the second section where we worked on the register for the staff. Okay, so now let's proceed to section 3. In section 3, we are supposed to import the files from the bonus folder. Okay, so as I showed you, there are 7 files in the bonus folder. We are supposed to commit all of them and then transform, add them to the basic, and then do our analysis. So let's see how this works. So while we are here, we don't want to leave Power Query. I indicated earlier you can come home and then go to new source, and we will now fetch from file and commit this folder. Okay, so this is my bonus folder. So in this case, I'm lifting the entire folder, so I don't really have to double click, right? So I click on this and I click open. So what Power Query will do is that it will give me a view of all the files that are in here. Ideally, you should have the same structure, the same extension, okay, so that it can be easier to combine. Okay, so this is the preview. Now, we have some further instructions here. So when we click on the transform data, a combine icon will come up, right? So let's see, we are going to choose transform data first. I want you to see the dialog box that comes after this point before we combine. So let's click on transform data. Now, this allows you to preview what you saw earlier. Okay, so the content is what we are after. You see these 2 icons to combine the files. So normally when you do this step, it allows you to check and then make modifications if there are outliers in the extension and all that, right? So that is why we went through this step first, but everything is fine here. We'll go ahead and combine the content using the icon to the top right. Now, in this dialog box, we get to format the 7 files based on a sample. So of the 7 files sorted, in this case alphabetically, we get April suggested to us as basis for the formatting for the rest. So we use the folder instead as basis. So let's proceed on that. And then, so once we've selected the folder, we'll go ahead and then click OK. Okay, so you notice that a series of queries now come in. Okay, so we go from the transform file to the helper query. Parameter that has been given to us is that sample file, which is shown here, the April 2024 file. Even though we didn't suggest it, it still comes up as the file to be used. Okay, so we transform that into this sample file. So after choosing that, we get the queries here with some helper files based on the parameter that we suggested, which ends up with this bonus file. Okay, now while we are here, the content is actually locked up in this column, right? So if you click on the side, so if you click on the side of each, you will notice that below the content for each file shows up here. Okay, as I mentioned, when you're combining files, it's easier if all the shape and form of the file are the same. Okay, so I just needed you to know this. Let's read the next instruction. So the next step says that we should only keep data by removing the other columns, right? I've already indicated why data is an important column here. This is what contains the data. The rest are all just attributes, okay, for further and better details on the files. So I'll click on this data, right click, and remove all other columns. Okay, so this is where we find the data. So now that we have this, let's read the next instruction. it is asking us to expand the column. So we'll come here, we'll expand with this icon. So the divergent arrows is our icon to expand. I'll click on this. Okay, we can uncheck use the original column name as prefix, and then we'll go ahead and click OK. So now you will notice that we now have all the payments stuck up here. This is for April, this is for February, January, and so on, taking the same shape. Okay, so 2 columns, 168 rows. Earlier, if we didn't have a date in our data set, we wouldn't have removed every other column. Okay, we would have at least brought along the name, okay, to help us know which month type we are dealing with. But we only brought in the data because in the data, we already have a date column to help us know which month the bonus file refers to. So this is what we currently have. Let's read the next instruction. We are supposed to create a date column using a conditional column. Okay, so similar to the conditional column we did with the total, we want to extend a new column here filled with the dates. Okay, so we can use the column 1 as basis because it is marked to this row called payday. Every date that we have here has payday on it. So we can simply say that if the row contains payday, then it should extend the column 2 contents here as a new column. Let's proceed and write that. So I'll come to add column, conditional column. Okay, so let's call this dates. This is what we are going to create. So we say that if column 1, in this case, we have 2 operators here because of the mixed data type, okay, is equal to payday. We type it as it is. Okay, then we want column 2. So we'll come here and then select a column. Okay, the content of column 2 to be in a new column that we are creating called date. Otherwise, we want a null. Right, so if column 1 contains payday, it's important you keep to the case. So in my case, I have to come and correct. This is pay space day lowercase, right? Then we want the content of column 2. Otherwise, it should throw a null. So I'm going to click OK for this. So we have something like this. If you go down, you notice that February also pulls out like that. January also pulls out like that. Okay. So that is the conditional column that we are required to create. Now, the next step is that we should fill down the date column, right? So once you have the date starting and the nulls below, it means everything that falls in between this date and the next dates will fall under the first date, 25th April. So we can now fill down. I'll select this column, right click, come here, and then fill down. Okay, so this is what we have. So we get a switch in dates at the next row that has the payday, and then we go on and on like that. Okay, now we are supposed to now create a type column to indicate the type of payment as bonus using custom column. Earlier, we had created a basic transactions query where we had type and labeled it basic. Okay. In this bonus query, we want to also differentiate and then bring in a label for bonus. So we are going to create a custom column called type and then fill all this with bonus. So while under add column, I'll come to custom column. Now, we are going to name this type. The column name that you are using here should be consistent with what you used in the basic transactions, because in the end, we want to put these two tables together and those column names should match. Okay, so type for type, exactly as you have it in basic and then in bonus. So I'll come here and then I'll fill this with bonus, which will be the content. I'll go ahead and I'll click OK. So we have our type column in here. Let's go and read the next step. Next step says that we should fill out now. So next step says that we should filter out the nows, the payday, or the employee ID. Okay. So let's see how we can do this. If you come to the very first column, payday should go out, now should go out, employee ID should go out, which will now leave us with only the IDs in this column. Okay, so let's see how to get that done. We can be a bit more direct. We can click on the filter icon and then go in and uncheck now. Okay, scroll down, uncheck employee ID, and then uncheck payday. Right. So in Power Query, when you uncheck from the filter icon, it basically means that those rows are going to be deleted going forward. They will not show up. Okay. So if that is done, we can go ahead and then we click OK. So this is now going to be our filtered rows. Alternatively, if you wanted to use the advanced option, you could now come and use the AND combinations, okay, to set the values for now, employee ID, and payday. You get the same result. Okay, so that is what we have. Let's see the next one. So in the next one, we are supposed to rename the columns employee ID, amount, date, and type, right? So we've already done date and type here. So let's call this employee ID. Again, it should be consistent with what we have in the basic transaction. This one should be called amount. This is date, this is type. Let's check and be sure. Employee ID, date, amount, and type. Same as we had in the basic transactions. Okay, so we've done this. Now, in the last step, we are supposed to select all columns and detect data type. Okay, now you notice that because of the process we use to transform the data, we have ABC123 throughout. Okay, so the data type has not been assigned automatically for us. So if that happens to you, you can automatically detect the data type by selecting all. Okay, then you go to transform. Under transform, you have this option, detect data type. So once we do that, we have the data type applied to each column. But just to be consistent with our employee ID data type, you know we chose text in this earlier one. So we will now come and override this with a text. Okay, so that we can replace that step for employee IDs to be read as text, because we don't expect to do any aggregations on this. Right. So this is set. Let's see if you have completed all the steps. Okay. Now that we are set, let's now append. Append basically means combining by stacking the queries under each other. Okay, so to do that, basic and bonus are the tables or queries we need to append. They should have the same columns, type the same way. They should have the same columns with the same headers, type the same way. So if that is met, we can now proceed and then append. So appending is available under home. In the combined group, you see append queries. Okay, so we can start with any of it unless we have specific instructions. So we can start with the basic transactions. I'll come to home. So we'll come to append queries, click on this. We are choosing append queries as new, so we'll click on that. Now, this is our first table, basic transactions. Our second table is bonus, right? These two have the same columns and headers. So we are going to proceed and click OK. So what we expect is we now see a new query called append 1. The two queries have been combined here. You know by going to the type column. If you click on the filter icon, you see there's basic and bonus as the unique entries that are in here. Okay. So this is what we're expected to do. I'll come in here. So the next instruction is that we should name this new query as payments. So this new query currently named append 1. We'll come in, highlight this, and then we name this as payments. Right. So effectively, all our analysis can now be done on this because this now has data on our basic payments and our bonus payments. Our date of payments are also here as well. So far as our analysis is concerned, the only thing that is missing here is the respective bank for each staff. Okay. So that is what is missing in this payments query. Once we're able to do that, we should be able to give HR what is needed for that summary table. Okay, now let's proceed with the last section, which is we are required to merge payments with register, and we will use that process to basically look up the bank name for each staff, right? So as I mentioned earlier, if you look at where we are now, this table is enough to give HR what is required. But we need to look up the respective bank for each staff. So to do that, we are going to merge. Merge is another way to combine data, right? So to merge, you have to at least have one common column between the two tables that you are trying to merge. That will be basis for you to look up information from the other. Okay, so that you can have the information you want in one place. So let's proceed. I'm currently in the payments query. Under home, I'll go to merge queries. So now I want the information to come to this current query. So I'm choosing the first one, merge queries, right? So I'll click on merge queries. This starting query is the payments table I'm currently in. So that's my table 1. I want to merge this with the register. Okay. So this is what I have. So as I indicated, at least you should have one common column between the two. In this case is employee ID matching employee ID. What we basically want is all from the left table that matches the second table. So you see that all the 280 rows get to find their bank names from the second one. And that is why we have this label here. So if that is what you have, you can go ahead and then click OK. So once you click OK, you notice that there's a column that has been added here from the register with the diverging arrows, which means we can expand. So I'll click on this. Now, this will list all the columns that are in the register table. Yours is to select what you are interested in, your lookup result. Okay, so I want to merge this payment. I will uncheck everything and then look for bank name. So this is what I want to bring in here. I'll go ahead and then click OK. So this gives me the full set of columns or fields I need to tell HR how much was transferred on each payday. Okay, that's the month, to these different banks. So that is the query that we have. So at this point, let's now load our final work. Earlier, we loaded the basic transactions as a table. You have to note that the rest of the queries came in later. We haven't yet loaded them. So I'll come to close and load. I'll choose close and load to. So basically this is going to apply to the subsequent 3 queries that we created. Now we have this option, the table option, but we want to hold the 3 queries as a connection so that we don't see the physical output, but the transformed query is stored in memory, right? Going forward with this case study, we could actually create a data model out of this. But for the purposes of this video, we'll keep it as it is, holding it in just the connection. And then we'll go ahead and then click OK. So let's see what we have here. So in the queries view are the transform files from the combination of folders, from the combination of files. And then these are main queries. basic transactions, register, bonus, and payments. Okay, so now you notice that the basic transactions table already is here as a table. Normally with these queries, you can reload and change the form of the output. So I can right click this, right? And then there's an option to load to. This is what we have. I can also choose to load this as a connection. Okay. So if I do that, what it's going to do is that it's going to erase this output and then load that as a connection. So you can always change the output type. So if I click OK, so I'll get this warning just to indicate that if I've used this in any work, it may contribute to a possible data loss. We have not used this anywhere, so I'll just click OK. Okay, so now all our queries are stored as connections, right? As I indicated, if you're proceeding with a data model or any further analysis from this point, it's still accessible, just that you don't see it in its physical form. Okay, now to create that summary report, payments is our table. Okay, so we can reload this, okay, into a pivot table report. Right, so you realize that I'm currently in this existing worksheet. It's starting in B4, so my pivot table is going to start from here. I'm going to click OK to convert this into a pivot table report. Now you notice that this begins a pivot table report with the columns or fields in my payments query or table here. Okay, so let's now proceed and create our final output for HR. So we begin with the amount, how much was paid. So this can now come to the value section. This is the amount that was paid overall. We want to break this down by pay date. So I'll take dates and push this into the row section. So we have something like this. Normally, if you are using generic dates, you can get a date hierarchy. Okay, so instead of just the months, we can have days, quarters, and all that. You can select any of the cells in that row label, right click, go to group, okay, and then deselect the ones that you don't need. So in this case, I'm taking away days so that I'm just left with only months. Now, HR also wants to know the breakdown by bank, right? So I'll take the bank name and then take this to the column section. Okay, so this is the report for HR. To make it easier for HR to break down by type, in this case, bonus or basic, we can choose to put this in the filter section. Okay, so that we can switch between basic and bonus if you like. Okay, so this will give you only basic, and then this will also give you only bonus. Otherwise, you can also clear your filter for all. Okay. This is the basic layout for your pivot table. Alternatively, you could set the type as a slicer. So I can right click this and then add it as a slicer, right? Which gives us a more elegant way to filter. Okay, so I can place this on the side or at the top depending, right? So I can take this and then filter by basic or bonus, right? So it's a rather simple pivot table, but it's a learning that matters. If you look at all that we've gone through, helping you to load the data from different sources, going through all these transformation, and then showing you the different ways you can load. If you are new to Power Query, I hope this has given you a good foundation or a clear idea on how Power Query can help you transform data. Thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you in the next video.
If this video was helpful and you would like to receive more of these videos directly on your WhatsApp, you can send ad to this WhatsApp number. We'll add you to our broadcast list so you receive our videos directly. You can also visit our YouTube channel, Finance Skills Hub. All our old videos are here. Please subscribe for notification of new videos or connect with us on any of these social media handles. Thank you so much for watching.